The gunshot echoed across the plains as Delilah O'Connor urged her horse forward, one hand clutching the reins, the other pressed protectively against her swollen belly. The early April sky of 1875 was darkening with an approaching storm, much like the danger that pursued her through the Kansas territory. 6 months pregnant and desperate, she had nothing but the clothes on her back, a small bundle of possessions, and the terrifying knowledge that her husband's killers were likely still following her trail. "Just a little farther," she whispered to the tired mare beneath her. The animal had been running too hard for too long, its sides heaving with exertion. Delilah knew they couldn't continue much longer, but stopping meant death for her and her unborn child. Rain began to fall, first as scattered drops that quickly transformed into a punishing downpour. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the vast emptiness around her. There were no settlements in sight, no friendly faces to offer refuge. The plains of Kansas stretched endlessly in every direction, beautiful and merciless. Delilah had been traveling for 3 days, ever since she'd witnessed her husband Thomas gunned down by the Barker gang. They'd come looking for the money Thomas had supposedly stolen from them, money Delilah knew nothing about. When they couldn't find it, they'd murdered him in cold blood, right in front of her eyes. She'd managed to escape during the chaos, fleeing their small homestead on the outskirts of Topeka, knowing the gang wouldn't let her live as a witness. A flash of lightning revealed something in the distance, the shadowy outline of a building. Hope surged through her exhausted body. As she drew closer, she could make out a modest cabin with a small barn beside it. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the rain, promising warmth and perhaps humanity within. Delilah hesitated at the property's edge. The strangers inside might offer salvation or further peril. But as another contraction gripped her, the third in the past hour, she knew she had no choice. The baby wasn't due for months, but the stress and hard riding were taking their toll. She guided her horse toward the barn, thinking to seek shelter there without disturbing the inhabitants. But before she could dismount, the cabin door swung open. A tall figure holding a lantern stepped onto the porch, a rifle clearly visible in his other hand. "Who's there?" a deep voice called out. Delilah froze, too exhausted to flee, too desperate to lie. "Please," she managed, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I mean no harm. I just need shelter." The man raised the lantern higher, illuminating her rain-soaked form, her advanced pregnancy unmistakable. His expression shifted from wariness to concern. "Good Lord, madam, get yourself in out of this weather," he said, lowering his rifle. He stepped off the porch into the downpour, reaching her side quickly. "You're in no condition to be out in a storm." As he came closer, Delilah could see his face weathered by sun and wind, but not unkind. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair and eyes that held both caution and compassion. "Owen Yates," he introduced himself, helping her down from the horse. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." "Delilah O'Connor," she replied, suddenly dizzy as her feet touched the ground. She swayed dangerously, and Owen steadied her with a strong arm. "The baby," she whispered, clutching her belly as another contraction seized her. "Something's wrong." Owen's face hardened with determination. "I've got you, Mrs. O'Connor, and I'll see to your horse after we get you settled." He practically carried her to the cabin, kicking the door open and guiding her to a chair near the fire. The interior was simple but clean, a one-room dwelling with a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a cookstove that radiated blessed heat. "You're having contractions," he stated rather than asked, his voice calm but serious. Delilah nodded, terror gripping her. "It's too early. The baby isn't due until July." Owen frowned, but his voice remained steady. "Let me get you some dry clothes. They'll be too big, but they're clean." He moved to a wooden trunk, pulling out a shirt and pair of trousers. "These were my sister's. She stayed with me last year." He handed them to her along with a blanket. "I'll step outside while you change. Call if you need help." The moment he closed the door behind him, Delilah nearly collapsed with the weight of everything she'd been holding inside. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled out of her soaked dress. She was a stranger in this man's home. Her husband was dead, Killers were hunting her, and her baby might be coming months too early. How had her life fallen apart so completely? She managed to don the dry clothes, which indeed swam on her despite her pregnant belly, and wrapped the blanket around herself just as another contraction hit. This one was stronger, making her cry out involuntarily. The door opened immediately, Owen's concerned face appearing. "Mrs. O'Connor." "Please," she gasped as the pain subsided. "Call me Delilah," he nodded, entering fully and closing the door against the storm. "The contractions, how far apart are they?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe 20 minutes. They started a few hours ago, but I thought they were just from the riding." Owen ran a hand through his damp hair. "I'm no doctor, but my sister had a baby last year. I was there." He moved to the stove, pouring hot water into a basin. "We need to see if we can stop this. The baby's much too early." Delilah watched him, trying to gauge whether she could trust this stranger with her life and her child's. Something in his methodical movements, the controlled concern in his expression, made her think perhaps she could. "Why are you out here alone in this condition?" he asked, bringing the basin of warm water and a clean cloth to her. Delilah hesitated. Telling him the truth might put him in danger too. "You're running from something," he said, not a question but a statement. She looked up at him, seeing intelligence behind those dark eyes. "Someone," she corrected. "Men who killed my husband 3 days ago. They think I know where some money is hidden, money I've never seen." Owen's jaw tightened, but he simply nodded. "Wash your face and hands, it'll make you feel better, then we need to get you lying down." Another contraction gripped her and she gasped, clutching the edge of the table. "Breathe through it," Owen instructed, his voice calm. "That's it, in and out." When it passed, he helped her to the bed, adding another blanket over her. "I'm going to make you some tea. My mother swore by it for stopping early labor." As he moved around the small cabin, Delilah studied him. Owen Yates was clearly a man comfortable with solitude, his movements efficient in the confined space. His clothes were worn but well kept, his manner reserved but not unfriendly. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "I could bring trouble to your door." Owen paused in his preparations, considering her question. "Where I come from, you don't turn away someone in need, especially not a woman with child." He returned to the stove. "Besides, trouble has a way of finding folks out here with or without invitation." He brought her a steaming cup of tea that smelled of herbs and honey. "Drink this slowly, all of it." Delilah took the cup gratefully. "Thank you." She sipped the bitter liquid, grimacing slightly. "What is it?" "Red raspberry leaf, chamomile, and a few other things. Like I said, my mother's recipe. She was a midwife back in Missouri." She passed 5 years ago, cholera." "I'm sorry," Delilah murmured. She understood loss all too well now. Owen nodded his acknowledgement. "Finish the tea." "I need to see to your horse and secure things for the night." When he left, Delilah sank back against the pillows, the tea warming her from within. She could hear Owen moving around outside despite the storm, taking care of her mare, checking his property. The simple sounds of normalcy were comforting after days of terror. By the time he returned, soaked through again, she'd finished the tea and was feeling the tendrils of exhaustion pulling at her consciousness. "Your horse is fed and rubbed down," he reported, removing his dripping coat and hat. "Storm's getting worse. No one will be traveling tonight." "Thank you," Delilah said, meaning it more deeply than the simple words could express. Owen nodded, hanging his wet garments near the fire to dry. "Have the contractions eased at all?" As if in answer, pain seized her again, though perhaps slightly less intense than before. "Maybe a little," she admitted when it passed. "Good, the tea may be helping." He pulled a chair near the bed. "You should try to rest, I'll keep watch." Delilah wanted to protest that he needed rest too, but she was simply too exhausted to argue. "The men who are after me, they're dangerous." "Most men with guns are," Owen replied evenly, "but they won't find you tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." His calm confidence was reassuring. For the first time in days, Delilah felt she might be safe, at least for the moment. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. A shadow passed across Owen's face. "I prefer the quiet, and the horses I raise prefer the space." There was more to it than that, Delilah sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets and their sorrows. Hers had led her here to this stranger's cabin, pregnant and afraid. His had led him to isolation on the Kansas plains. "Sleep now," he said, his voice gentler than before. "I'll be right here." As Delilah drifted into much-needed slumber, her last conscious thought was a prayer that her baby would wait, would give her time to find safety, and that this quiet, solitary cowboy would indeed be the protector he seemed. Owen Yates watched the pregnant woman sleep, her face finally relaxed in slumber after hours of pain and fear. The contractions had gradually subsided, coming less frequently and with less intensity. He'd helped her through each one, supporting her back, reminding her to breathe, offering sips of the medicinal tea between spasms. Now, in the quiet hours before dawn, he allowed himself to consider the situation fully. A pregnant widow, running from killers, had literally appeared on his doorstep during the worst storm in months. It seemed like something from one of the dime novels his sister was always trying to get him to read. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The rain continued to fall, though the thunder had moved on. His property was secure, the barn locked, his horses safe inside, the cabin's shutters fastened against both weather and potential intruders. He'd lived alone long enough to develop habits of caution. Since leaving the Texas Rangers 3 years ago, Owen had deliberately chosen isolation. After what happened in Dallas, after the betrayal and the bloodshed, he couldn't trust anyone wearing a badge, couldn't trust himself wearing one either. So he'd traveled north, using his savings to buy this small plot 30 miles outside Wichita, Kansas, where he raised and trained horses and spoke to humans only when necessary. Now, a very human problem had landed in his life, disrupting his carefully constructed solitude. He glanced back at Delilah O'Connor, her red gold hair spread across his pillow, one hand protectively curved around her swollen belly even in sleep. He should take her to Wichita as soon as the weather cleared. The town had a doctor, a sheriff, people who could help her properly. It was the sensible thing to do, but something in her story troubled him. Men who would murder her husband and chase a pregnant woman across Kansas were men without conscience. If they were as determined as she feared, Wichita might be the first place they'd look for her. A soft sound drew his attention back to the bed. Delilah was stirring, her face contorted in pain again. Owen moved quickly to her side. "Another contraction," she nodded, gritting her teeth. He took her hand, letting her squeeze as the pain washed over her. When it passed, she exhaled shakily. "That was milder," she said, her voice hoarse from sleep, "and it's been longer between them." "That's good," Owen replied, relief evident in his tone. "The tea seems to be helping." Delilah pushed herself up slightly, wincing. "What time is it?" "Near dawn. You should try to sleep more." She shook her head. "I've imposed on you enough. You've been up all night." "I'm used to it," Owen said with a slight shrug. "Part of raising horses is keeping odd hours." Delilah studied him in the dim firelight. "You were something else before you were a horse trainer." Owen stiffened. "What makes you say that?" "The way you move. The way you check the property before settling in. The gun you keep within reach." Her eyes were keen despite her exhaustion. "Military, law enforcement." For a moment, Owen considered deflecting her observation. But there was something in her direct gaze that made dishonesty seem pointless. "Texas Rangers," he admitted, "for 8 years. Why did you leave?" "That's a long story, Mrs. O'Connor." "Delilah," she corrected gently, "and it seems we have time." Owen moved away, adding wood to the fire, using the task to gather his thoughts. "I left because I couldn't do the job anymore, not the way it needed to be done." "Something happened," Delilah surmised. "Something always happens," he replied, his voice taking on an edge he hadn't intended. "Sorry." "It's not a topic I discuss much." Delilah nodded, accepting his boundary. "I understand. We all have things we'd rather not talk about." The silence between them was broken by the first birdsong outside, heralding the approaching dawn. The storm had passed, leaving behind that peculiar stillness that often follows violent weather. "I should make you something to eat," Owen said, moving toward the stove. "You need to keep up your strength." Delilah attempted to rise. "Let me help. I'm feeling much better." "Stay put," Owen ordered, more sharply than he'd intended. Seeing her startled expression, he softened his tone. Please, the contractions may have eased, but you need rest, doctor's orders. Are you a doctor now too, Mr. Yates? She asked, a hint of a smile touching her lips. Owen, he corrected, matching her earlier insistence. And no, but I've seen what happens when a woman doesn't rest after nearly losing a child. My sister almost died because she was too stubborn to stay in bed. Delilah sobered at that. I'm sorry, is she all right now? She's fine. Living in Colorado with her husband and daughter. He began mixing batter for cornbread. Writes me letters every month trying to convince me to join them. Why don't you? Owen concentrated on his cooking, not meeting her eyes. I prefer my own company. No one prefers complete solitude, Delilah said softly. They just fear something else more. The insight was uncomfortably accurate. Owen chose not to respond, focusing instead on preparing a simple but hearty breakfast of cornbread, bacon, and coffee. As the food cooked, filling the cabin with comforting aromas, he realized how strange it felt to be caring for someone else after so long alone. By the time the sun had fully risen, casting golden light through the cabin's windows, Delilah had eaten a small portion of breakfast and was looking markedly better. Color had returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes had diminished somewhat. The contractions have stopped completely, she reported, sipping the herbal tea Owen had brewed again. Your mother's remedy seems to have worked. Owen nodded, relieved. Still, you need to take it easy, no riding for a few days at least. Delilah's expression fell. I can't stay here. The men who are after me won't find you here, Owen interrupted firmly. Not many folks even know I live out this way, and those who do mind their own business. But what if they track me? I can't put you in danger too. Owen regarded her steadily. Mrs. O'Connor. Delilah, I spent 8 years tracking people who didn't want to be found. I know how it's done, which means I know how to prevent it. These aren't ordinary men, she insisted. They're brutal. Their leader, Silas Barker, she broke off, her hands beginning to tremble. Owen sat down across from her. Tell me everything, start from the beginning. Delilah took a deep breath, steadying herself. My husband Thomas and I had a small farm outside Topeka. We weren't wealthy, but we were making do. 3 days ago, 4 men rode onto our property just before sunset. Thomas recognized them immediately. He'd worked for them briefly the previous year when our crops failed. Doing what? Delilah's eyes dropped to her hands. He never said exactly, just that it was work he wasn't proud of, but that would get us through the winter. I assumed it was smuggling or some other minor lawbreaking. She looked up, her eyes pleading for understanding. Thomas was a good man, but we were desperate. Owen nodded, understanding all too well how desperation could drive decent people to poor choices. Whatever he did for them, he quit after a few months, said he couldn't live with himself. We scraped by, and things were finally looking up this spring. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Then they showed up, demanding money. They said Thomas had stolen from them $5,000. He denied it, but they wouldn't listen. They tore our home apart looking for it. And when they didn't find it, they shot him, right in front of me. Her voice broke. He was unarmed, begging them to spare me and the baby. Silas Barker just laughed and pulled the trigger. Owen's jaw tightened, his old rage at injustice flaring despite his best efforts to suppress it. How did you escape? They were arguing about what to do with me. Silas wanted to, she couldn't finish the thought. One of the others thought they should keep me alive until I told them where the money was. While they argued, I slipped out the back. Our horse was still saddled from when Thomas had returned from town earlier. I just ran. And you're certain they followed? Yes. I saw riders on the horizon yesterday morning. I've been pushing my horse too hard, trying to stay ahead. She rubbed her belly unconsciously. I think that's what brought on the contractions. Owen absorbed her story, mentally calculating possibilities. If the Barker gang was as ruthless as she described, they wouldn't give up easily. $5,000 was a fortune enough to make men kill without hesitation. Did Thomas ever indicate he had taken their money? Delilah shook her head firmly. Never. We lived simply. There was no sudden spending, no hidden cash. If he took it, I never saw evidence of it. And you have no family, no one who could help. My parents died years ago. I have a cousin in California, but we haven't spoken in a decade. She looked at him directly. I'm alone, Owen. Except for this baby. The vulnerability in her statement struck something deep within him, recognition, perhaps, of his own carefully constructed isolation. Not anymore, he heard himself say. I'll help you, keep you safe until we figure out a more permanent solution. Surprise flickered across Delilah's face. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know enough, Owen replied. I know you're a woman in trouble through no fault of your own. I know there's an innocent child involved, and I know that men like Silas Barker need to be stopped. For a long moment, Delilah simply looked at him, as if trying to determine whether his offer was genuine. Finally, she nodded. Thank you. I don't have money to pay you, but when I'm recovered, I can work. We'll worry about that later, Owen cut her off. For now, you need to rest and recover your strength. The baby needs that too. Relief flooded her features. I don't know how to thank you. No need, Owen said gruffly, unused to gratitude. I'm going to check the property, make sure everything's secure. Then I'll ride out a ways, see if there's any sign of pursuit. Be careful, Delilah urged. If it's them, I can handle myself, Owen assured her, checking his revolver before tucking it into his holster. And I won't engage them if I spot them, just assess the situation. As he prepared to leave, gathering his hat and coat, Delilah called to him from the bed. Owen, what happens if they do find us? He turned to look at her, his expression hardening with determination. They won't, but if they did, they'd learn that they picked the wrong cabin to threaten. With that promise hanging in the air between them, Owen stepped out into the morning sunlight, his senses immediately alert for any sign of danger. The plains stretched out before him, seemingly peaceful under the vast blue sky. But Owen knew better than most how deceptive such peace could be and how quickly it could shatter. He whistled for his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding that came trotting from the corral. As he saddled the animal, Owen considered the decision he'd just made. After 3 years of deliberate solitude, of avoiding entanglements and responsibilities, he had just pledged to protect a pregnant widow from ruthless killers. It wasn't rational. It certainly wasn't in keeping with the life he'd built for himself. And yet, for the first time in years, something felt right. Purpose had returned to his life, unbidden but not unwelcome. Owen mounted his horse, casting one last glance at the cabin where Delilah rested. Then he turned and rode toward the horizon, determined to ensure that the danger pursuing her would never reach his doorstep or the vulnerable woman who had somehow breached the walls he'd built around himself. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly before Owen as he rode, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. The recent rain had left the ground soft, making tracks easy to spot but also easy to leave. He was careful to stick to rocky outcroppings when possible, mindful that he didn't want to create a trail back to his cabin. After an hour of riding in expanding circles around his property, Owen found what he'd been looking for and dreading. Hoofprints of multiple horses heading northwest, roughly in the direction his cabin lay from Topeka. The tracks were fresh, likely made after the rain had stopped this morning. He dismounted, examining the evidence more closely. 4 horses moving at a steady pace, not rushing but determined. Men who believed they had all the time in the world to find their quarry. Owen remounted and continued following the tracks from a distance, careful to keep to higher ground where he could observe without being seen. Another hour's tracking brought him within sight of the riders' 4 men, just as Delilah had described, making camp beside a small creek about 10 miles from his property. Using his spyglass, Owen studied them from his vantage point on a distant ridge. They matched Delilah's description: rough-looking men, heavily armed. The leader was unmistakable, a tall man with a shock of white blonde hair and a distinctive red vest. Silas Barker. Owen watched as they watered their horses and prepared what appeared to be a midday meal. Their manner was unhurried, confident. They didn't behave like men who feared losing their quarry. More like predators who knew their prey had limited places to hide. Having seen enough, Owen retreated, taking a circuitous route back toward his cabin. He needed to prepare. The gang wasn't on his immediate doorstep, but they were close enough to be a serious threat. At their current pace, they might stumble across his property by tomorrow. When he returned to the cabin, he found Delilah sitting up in bed, sewing a tear in her dress. She looked up when he entered, her expression immediately anxious. "You found them," she said, reading his face. Owen nodded, removing his hat. "About 10 miles east, 4 men, like you said. They're moving this way, though not directly. I don't think they know exactly where you are, but they're searching methodically." Delilah's hands stilled, the needle poised mid-stitch. "How long do we have?" "A day, maybe 2 if we're lucky." Owen hung his hat on a peg by the door. "How are you feeling? Any more contractions?" "No." "Your mother's tea seems to have worked." She set aside her sewing. "What do we do now?" Owen moved to the fireplace, stoking the dying embers. "We have 2 options. Try to outrun them or prepare to face them." "Running puts the baby at risk again," Delilah said quietly. "And they've already proven they can track me across half of Kansas." "That leaves standing our ground," Owen concluded, "which means we need to prepare." "I won't ask you to fight my battles, Owen. These men are killers." Owen turned to face her, his expression grim. "So was I once upon a time. The difference is I killed men who deserved it, men like Silas Barker." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Delilah simply nodded. "Tell me what to do. I won't be helpless in this." "Can you shoot?" Owen asked. "My father taught me with a rifle." "I'm decent, though it's been years." "Good, that's a start." Owen moved to a trunk in the corner, unlocking it to reveal several firearms. "We'll need to fortify the cabin, make it defensible." For the rest of the day, they worked together to prepare. Owen showed Delilah how to load and fire his spare revolver, refreshing her skills until she could hit a target consistently. They moved furniture to create defensive positions, boarded up the window that faced east, and prepared emergency supplies in case they needed to flee. As the sun began to set, Owen secured the livestock in the barn and brought extra water into the cabin. He didn't want to have to venture outside if they came under siege. "They might not find us," Delilah said as they ate a simple dinner of beans and leftover cornbread. "Your place is well hidden from the main trails." "True," Owen acknowledged, "but men like Barker are thorough and determined." Delilah was quiet for a moment, pushing her food around her plate. "I've been thinking about what you asked earlier, whether Thomas might have actually taken their money." Owen looked up, waiting for her to continue. "I don't believe he stole from them," she said slowly. "But a few weeks before he died, he was acting strangely, nervous. He kept checking outside like he was expecting someone." She met Owen's eyes. "And one night I woke up and he wasn't in bed. I found him digging in the root cellar." "Did you ask him about it?" "I did. He said he was looking for preserved vegetables we'd stored last fall. It seemed odd at the time, but I didn't press." Her expression turned troubled. "What if he did have their money? What if he hid it somewhere on our farm? If that were the case, they would have found it when they searched your home," Owen reasoned. "Unless—" Delilah's eyes widened with sudden realization. "Unless he didn't hide it at our farm at all." "What are you thinking?" "Thomas made a trip to Wichita about a month ago, said he needed supplies we couldn't get in Topeka. He was gone for 3 days." She leaned forward. "What if he hid the money somewhere in Wichita?" Owen considered this. "It's possible, but why wouldn't he tell you? To protect me, maybe." "So I genuinely wouldn't know if they ever came looking." She rubbed her temples. "God, I wish he'd just told me." "If the money is in Wichita, that might explain why they're so determined to find you. They must think he told you where it is." Delilah shook her head. "But he didn't." "I have no idea where in Wichita he would have hidden anything." "Think, Delilah, did he mention meeting anyone there, staying anywhere specific?" She closed her eyes, concentrating. "He mentioned getting a drink at a place called the Drover's Rest, I think. Said the barman reminded him of his father." Her eyes opened. "And he brought back candy from a shop called Sullivan's." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Both real places. The Drover's caters to cattlemen, and Sullivan's has the best peppermint sticks in Kansas." He stood, moving to the window to peer out into the gathering darkness. "If the money's in Wichita, that might be our best move. Get there before Barker, find the money, and use it to negotiate." "Negotiate? These men killed Thomas in cold blood. They'd just kill us both and take the money." "Not if we involve the law," Owen said. "Wichita has a competent sheriff. With evidence of the money and testimony about the murder, they could be brought to justice." Delilah looked doubtful. That's a lot of ifs, Owen, and it means risking the baby again with hard travel. We'll take it slow, Owen promised. Use the wagon instead of riding horseback. It would be more comfortable for you. And if they catch up to us on the open road, Owen's expression hardened, then I'll deal with them. The certainty in his voice should have been frightening, but Delilah found it reassuring instead. This man, this former Texas Ranger who had chosen solitude over society, was willing to risk everything for her, a woman he'd known less than a day. Why are you doing this? She asked again, needing to understand. The truth this time. Owen was quiet for so long that Delilah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a confession. 3 years ago, I was tracking a gang in North Texas. They'd robbed a bank, killed 2 people. I was close to catching them when I got word that they'd taken hostages a woman and her young daughter. His eyes grew distant with the memory. My captain ordered me to wait for reinforcements, but I knew that by the time they arrived, those hostages would likely be dead. Delilah listened intently, sensing this was a story he rarely shared. I went in alone, managed to kill 3 of the 5 gang members, but not before he stopped, his jaw tightening. Not before they shot the little girl. She was 6 years old. Oh, Owen, Delilah breathed. I got the mother out alive. The girl died in her arms. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. After that, I couldn't wear the badge anymore, couldn't trust my judgment, so I left, came here where I couldn't get anyone else killed. It wasn't your fault, Delilah said gently. You tried to save them, and failed where it mattered most. Owen's gaze returned to her, focusing on her pregnant belly. I won't fail again, Delilah. I won't let Barker or anyone else harm you or your child. That's why I'm doing this. The raw honesty in his words touched something deep within her. This man carried wounds as profound as her own, perhaps deeper. Yet here he was, offering protection, offering hope. Thank you, she said simply, knowing that words were inadequate for the commitment he was making. Owen nodded once, then returned to the practical. We should leave at first light, pack only what's essential. With luck, we can reach Wichita by tomorrow evening. And if we don't find the money, then we'll find another way to deal with Barker. His tone left no doubt that one way or another, he would keep his promise to protect her. As night settled fully over the Kansas prairie, Delilah found herself drawing comfort from the presence of this quiet, determined man. For the first time since Thomas's murder, she allowed herself to feel something beyond fear, a cautious hope that she and her child might have a future after all. Owen sat by the window through the night, keeping watch while Delilah slept. Tomorrow would bring challenges, perhaps violence. But tonight, in the stillness of his cabin, with the sound of Delilah's peaceful breathing as company, he felt more purpose than he had in years. Dawn broke over the prairie in streaks of pink and gold, revealing a world washed clean by the recent rains. Owen, who had dozed intermittently throughout the night, rose from his post by the window and moved quietly about the cabin, preparing for their journey. He had already packed supplies, food, water, ammunition, medical necessities, and brought the wagon around to the front of the cabin. Delilah stirred as he stoked the fire, her eyes opening slowly. Is it time? Owen nodded. Sun's up. We should get moving while we have the advantage of daylight. She sat up carefully, one hand automatically going to her belly. No signs of them. Not yet, but that doesn't mean they aren't close. He handed her a cup of coffee. How are you feeling this morning? Any pain? Just stiff from bed rest, she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. But the baby seems calm today. Good, I've heated water if you want to wash up before we go. While Delilah prepared herself for the journey, Owen made one final check of the cabin, securing anything valuable, ensuring no fire hazards remained. He'd lived simply these past 3 years, accumulating few possessions of importance. Still, this small cabin had become home, and leaving it perhaps for good was harder than he'd expected. By the time the sun had fully cleared the horizon, they were ready to depart. Owen helped Delilah into the wagon, where he'd created a reasonably comfortable seat using blankets and his spare coat. I've tied your mare to the back, he told her. She's still tired from your hard riding, but she'll be fine following along. Delilah nodded, settling herself as comfortably as possible in the wagon seat. What about your horses? I've left them enough food and water for a week. Neighbors about 5 miles west check on the place when I'm gone longer. He climbed up beside her, taking the reins. Ready. As I'll ever be, she replied, her voice steady despite the apprehension in her eyes. Owen clicked to the team of draft horses and the wagon lurched forward. Rather than taking the main trail, he guided them across the prairie on a less traveled path that would eventually connect with the road to Wichita. It was longer, but offered more cover and fewer chances of running into Barker's gang. They traveled in companionable silence for the first hour, each lost in their own thoughts. The prairie was coming alive with spring patches of wildflowers dotted the landscape, and meadowlarks called from the occasional stand of cottonwoods. It was peaceful, belying the danger that pursued them. It's beautiful out here, Delilah commented as they crossed a small stream. I can see why you chose this place. Owen glanced around, seeing the familiar terrain through new eyes. It has its moments. Do you ever get lonely? The question caught him off guard. Not usually, he answered honestly. I keep busy with the horses, and there's always work to be done. That's not the same as company, Delilah observed gently. Humans need other humans, Owen, even the most independent of us. Some people are better off alone, he said, more sharply than he'd intended. Safer for everyone that way. Delilah didn't press the point, but her expression suggested she disagreed. They lapsed back into silence, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon and the steady plod of hooves the only sounds. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and biscuits. Owen helped Delilah down from the wagon, noticing how she winced slightly. You're in pain, he observed, concern evident in his voice. Just sore from sitting, she assured him. The baby's fine, moving around quite a bit, actually. They sat beneath the shade of a lone oak tree, the wagon positioned to block them from view of the distant main trail. Owen scanned the horizon continuously, alert for any sign of pursuit. Tell me about your life before, Delilah said, breaking the silence. Before the Rangers, before everything. Owen hesitated, unused to talking about himself. But there was something about Delilah's genuine interest that made him willing to share. Grew up in eastern Texas. Small farm, not much different from yours probably. Father raised cattle, mother kept us clothed and fed somehow despite the drought years. He took a drink from his canteen. Joined the Rangers at 18, right after the war. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And was it? The right thing, Owen considered the question. For a while, did some good, helped some people who needed it, he shrugged. Until I didn't. Delilah watched him, her blue eyes thoughtful. You're a good man, Owen Yates, despite what you might think of yourself. He looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment. We should get moving again, still a long way to Wichita. As he helped her back into the wagon, their hands touched briefly, sending an unexpected jolt through him. Owen pulled away quickly, confused by his reaction. Delilah O'Connor was a widow, pregnant with another man's child, and in desperate circumstances. Any feelings beyond protectiveness were inappropriate and unwelcome. They continued their journey westward, the terrain gradually changing as they approached the more settled areas around Wichita. Scattered homesteads appeared, then more frequent signs of civilization, fenced fields, established roads, the occasional passing wagon. By late afternoon, they had reached the outskirts of Wichita. The town had grown considerably since Kansas had become a state, fueled by the cattle drives from Texas. Streets were busy with cowboys, merchants, and settlers, the atmosphere vibrant despite the lingering economic hardships that plagued much of the nation. Owen guided the wagon toward the center of town, where most businesses were located. Where should we start? The Drover's Rest or Sullivan's Candy Shop, Delilah considered. The Drover's seems more likely for hiding money. Thomas wouldn't have had much reason to go to a candy shop except for what he said buying me peppermints. Owen nodded agreement. The Drover's it is. They found the establishment on a corner near the cattle yards, a large, weathered building with hitching posts out front and the sounds of piano music drifting from within. Owen secured the wagon and helped Delilah down. Let me do the talking, he suggested. Places like this aren't always welcoming to women, especially in your condition. Delilah nodded, pulling her shawl more tightly around herself. Together they entered the saloon, greeted by the familiar smells of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. Despite the relatively early hour, several tables were occupied by men playing cards or simply drinking away the afternoon. A burly man with an impressive mustache stood behind the bar, polishing glasses. He looked up as they entered, his eyebrows raising slightly at the sight of Delilah. "Afternoon," Owen greeted, approaching the bar. "Looking for some information," the barman eyed them warily. "Information costs the same as whiskey in here, friend." Owen placed a coin on the bar. "Then pour me one, and tell me if you remember a man named Thomas O'Connor who came through about a month ago." The barman pocketed the coin and poured a measure of amber liquid. "Lot of men come through here, can't say I recall the name." "He would have mentioned his father," Delilah interjected softly. "Said you reminded him of him." Recognition flickered in the barman's eyes. "Oh sure, young fella, reddish hair, talked with a bit of an accent. Yeah, I remember him now, friendly sort, left a good tip." Owen took a sip of the whiskey, hiding his satisfaction. "He may have left something here for safekeeping, something important." The barman's expression closed immediately. "Don't know nothing about that. We don't hold things for people here." Owen studied the man, recognizing the lie for what it was. "It's important. His widow here needs to retrieve it." He nodded toward Delilah, whose pregnancy was impossible to miss. The barman looked at Delilah more closely, his expression softening slightly. "You're his wife." "Sorry for your loss, madam." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Look, your husband paid me to keep quiet about whatever he left. Said men might come looking, dangerous men. Said I wasn't to give it to anyone but him or a woman with red hair who knew about his father." Delilah stepped forward eagerly. "That's me. Please, it's very important. Those dangerous men he mentioned, they killed him. They're after me now." The barman hesitated, clearly conflicted. Finally, he sighed. "Wait here." He disappeared into a back room, returning moments later with a small package wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. "He left this, paid me well to keep it safe." Delilah took the package with trembling hands. "Thank you, you have no idea how important this is." "Just be careful," the barman warned. "Whatever trouble your husband was in, it followed him here. Had men asking about him last week. Rough types." Owen's attention sharpened. "What men? Did they give names?" "No, but one had a red vest, real flashy, mean eyes." The barman shuddered slightly at the memory. "Told him I never heard of Thomas O'Connor, but I don't think they believed me." "Thank you for the warning," Owen said grimly. "If they come back, you never saw us either." The barman nodded. "Far as I'm concerned, you two never walked through that door." Outside, Owen hurried Delilah back to the wagon, scanning the street for any sign of Barker's men. "We need to find somewhere private to open that package." "The hotel," Delilah suggested, clutching the mysterious bundle to her chest. "Too public, too many eyes and ears." Owen helped her into the wagon. "I know a place outside town. Used to camp there sometimes when I had business in Wichita." He drove them east of town, following the Arkansas River until they reached a secluded grove of cottonwoods. The location offered privacy and a clear view of anyone approaching. Once he'd secured the horses, Owen helped Delilah from the wagon and spread a blanket beneath one of the larger trees. She sat down carefully, then untied the twine on the package with shaking fingers. The oilcloth fell away to reveal a small wooden box locked with a simple latch. No key was visible. "It's locked," Delilah said, disappointment evident in her voice. Owen examined the box. "Simple lock, I can probably pick it." Using a small knife from his pocket, Owen worked at the lock for several minutes before it finally gave way with a satisfying click. He handed the box back to Delilah. "It's your husband's, you should be the one to open it." Delilah took a deep breath and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of cloth, was a stack of bills, more money than either of them had likely seen in one place, and a folded letter. With trembling hands, Delilah removed the letter and opened it. "It's from Thomas," she whispered, beginning to read aloud. "My dearest Delilah, if you're reading this, I fear the worst has happened." The money in this box, all $5,000 of it, is indeed stolen, though not in the way Barker believes. Last year when I worked for him, I discovered that he and his men had robbed a bank in Missouri, killing several people including a child. The money was their take from that robbery. I couldn't be part of such evil, but simply walking away wasn't enough. Those innocent people deserved justice. So I took the money, intending to return it to the bank. But Barker's influence runs deep, and I feared for your safety if I went to the authorities. I've arranged for a Pinkerton detective to meet me in Wichita next month. By then, I hope to have moved us somewhere safer. If I'm unable to keep that appointment, please take this money and this letter to Sheriff Taylor in Wichita. He's an honest man who will see justice done. Forgive me for keeping this from you. I only wanted to protect you and our child. All my love always, Thomas. Tears streamed down Delilah's face as she finished reading. He was trying to do the right thing. All this time I thought he might have stolen from them, but he was trying to bring them to justice. Owen felt a surge of respect for the man he'd never met. Thomas O'Connor had shown more courage than many lawmen he'd known. He was brave, foolish perhaps, but brave. What do we do now? Delilah asked, wiping her tears. Take this to Sheriff Taylor as Thomas wanted. Owen nodded slowly. We'll need the law's help to deal with Barker. But first, we need a safe place for you to stay while I make the arrangements. I'm not letting you face them alone, Delilah protested. You're 7 months pregnant, Delilah. Your priority has to be keeping that baby safe. His tone brooked no argument. Besides, we have the advantage now. We know what Barker's after, and we have proof of his crimes. Reluctantly, Delilah agreed. Where will I stay? Owen considered their options. There's a small boarding house on the north side of town, run by a widow named Mrs. Thornton. She's discreet and keeps a shotgun behind her counter. You seem to know her well, Delilah observed with a hint of something that might have been jealousy. She helped me once when I was tracking a fugitive, Owen explained. Good woman, trustworthy. They repacked the money and letter carefully, and Owen secured the box in an inside pocket of his coat. As they prepared to return to town, Delilah suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her belly. What is it? Owen asked urgently. Another contraction. No, she said, a smile breaking through her worry. The baby's kicking, hard, here. She took his hand and placed it against the side of her stomach. Owen started to pull away, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the gesture, but then he felt a distinct movement beneath his palm, a forceful push from within. The sensation was nothing short of miraculous. That's quite a kick, he managed, strangely moved by the experience. He's strong, Delilah said, her smile widening. Like his father, or she's strong like her mother, Owen countered, returning her smile before reluctantly removing his hand. We should get going before it gets dark. As they drove back toward Wichita, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Owen was aware of a shifting within himself. This woman and her unborn child were becoming more than just people to protect. They were becoming important to him in ways he hadn't expected and wasn't entirely comfortable with. Focused on scanning their surroundings for danger, Owen didn't notice how Delilah watched him, her own thoughts clearly running along similar lines. By the time they reached the outskirts of Wichita, shadows were lengthening across the streets, and lamps were being lit in windows throughout the town. The boarding house was exactly as Owen had described, a neat, 2-story structure with clean curtains in the windows and pots of early spring flowers on the porch. Mrs. Thornton herself answered their knock, a tall, angular woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner and shrewd eyes that took in everything about them in one glance. Owen Yates, she said, neither surprised nor particularly pleased to see him. Been a while, Mrs. Thornton, he greeted with a respectful nod. We need a room and discretion. The older woman's gaze shifted to Delilah, noting her condition and the wariness in her eyes. Something softened in Mrs. Thornton's expression. Trouble following you, I take it? Yes, madam, Owen confirmed. The dangerous kind, Mrs. Thornton sighed heavily. Always is with you, Yates. She stepped back, opening the door wider. Come on in then, got a room at the back, more private. As they stepped into the warmth of the boarding house, Delilah felt a wave of relief. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, everything might turn out all right. Sheriff Matthew Taylor of Wichita was known throughout Kansas as a fair, honest, and thoroughly dangerous man to cross. He'd brought order to the cattle town during its wildest years, facing down drunken cowboys and hardened criminals with the same implacable resolve. When Owen Yates walked into his office just after sunset, Taylor recognized him immediately. "Yates," he greeted, rising from behind his desk. "Heard you were raising horses somewhere east of here these days." "Sheriff," Owen acknowledged with a nod. "That's right, been keeping to myself mostly." "Until now, apparently," Taylor gestured to a chair. "What brings you to my office at this hour?" Owen remained standing. "A matter requiring discretion and action. Concerns a bank robbery in Missouri last year and a gang led by a man named Silas Barker." The sheriff's expression sharpened. "Barker, mean son of a gun with a fancy for red vests. That's him. He and his boys were in town last week. Caused a ruckus at the drovers, asking questions about some fella from Topeka." Taylor studied Owen carefully. "I'm guessing you know something about all that." Owen placed Thomas O'Connor's wooden box on the desk, then explained everything: Thomas's theft of the stolen money, his murder, Delilah's flight, and their discovery of the letter and cash. When he finished, Taylor let out a low whistle. "That's quite a tale, and the widow, she's where now?" "Safe," Owen said simply, not quite ready to reveal Delilah's location even to the sheriff. Taylor didn't press. "Smart. Barker's not the type to give up easily, especially not with $5,000 at stake. According to Thomas's letter, that money is evidence of a bank robbery and multiple murders in Missouri. Barker and his men should hang for what they've done." "I don't disagree," Taylor said, examining the money and letter, "but we need to catch them first. And preferably without any more bloodshed in my town." "They were headed this way as of yesterday," Owen informed him. "Following Mrs. O'Connor's trail, they could arrive any time." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to be ready for them." He studied Owen for a moment. "You carrying a badge these days, Yates?" "Not for 3 years. Want to wear one again, temporarily." Taylor opened a drawer and pulled out a deputy's badge. "Could use a man with your experience." Owen hesitated, memories of his failure in Texas flashing through his mind. But this was different. Delilah and her child needed him, needed the authority a badge would give him to act. "Just until Barker's dealt with," he agreed, taking the badge. Taylor nodded, satisfied. "Let's talk strategy. If Barker's as smart as you say, we'll need to be smarter." For the next hour, they developed a plan to capture Barker and his men with minimal risk to innocent bystanders. By the time Owen left the sheriff's office, night had fully fallen over Wichita. The streets were alive with the usual evening activities: saloon doors swinging open and closed, releasing bursts of music and laughter, shopkeepers closing up for the night, residents hurrying home. Owen made his way back to Mrs. Thornton's boarding house, alert for any sign of Barker or his men. The town seemed normal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was drawing closer with every passing hour. Mrs. Thornton herself answered his knock, eyeing the deputy's badge now pinned to his vest with raised eyebrows but no comment. She led him to a small parlor at the rear of the house where Delilah waited. She rose as he entered, relief evident on her face. "You spoke to the sheriff?" Owen nodded. "He's keeping the money and letter as evidence. We're setting a trap for Barker when he arrives." "And you're wearing a badge again," Delilah observed softly. Owen glanced down at the silver star. "Temporarily makes things simpler." Mrs. Thornton snorted. "Nothing's ever simple with a badge, Yates." She headed for the door. "I'll bring you both some supper. You look like you could use it." When she'd gone, Delilah moved closer to Owen. "Are you all right, wearing that again after what happened in Texas?" The genuine concern in her voice touched him. "It feels strange," he admitted, "but necessary." "You're a good lawman, Owen. Whatever happened before doesn't change that." He didn't respond directly to her assessment. "How are you feeling? And the baby?" "We're both fine. Mrs. Thornton has been very kind. She gave me a proper bath and some clean clothes that belonged to her daughter." Delilah smoothed the simple blue dress that, while still large on her frame, fit better than Owen's sister's clothes had. She also asked a lot of questions about my situation. What did you tell her? The truth, mostly. That my husband was murdered, that the men responsible are after me, and that you're helping me. She gave him a small smile. She seemed to approve, though she called you a trouble magnet with more courage than sense. Despite the gravity of their situation, Owen found himself chuckling. Mrs. Thornton never was one to mince words. The moment of levity faded as Delilah's expression grew serious again. What happens now, Owen, if your plan works and Barker is captured? It was a question he'd been avoiding in his own mind. Justice happens. Barker and his men will face charges for the bank robbery, the murders in Missouri, and for killing your husband. And after that, she pressed. What happens to me and my baby? Owen hesitated, unsure what answer she was looking for. You'll be safe. Free to go wherever you choose, start a new life. Where would I go? Delilah asked, her voice small. I have no home, no family. You could stay in Wichita, Owen suggested. It's a growing town, opportunities for a fresh start. Delilah studied him, her blue eyes searching his face. And you? Will you go back to your cabin? Back to solitude? The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Before Owen could formulate a response, Mrs. Thornton returned with a tray of food, effectively ending their conversation. But as they ate the simple meal of stew and fresh bread, Owen found himself unable to stop thinking about Delilah's question. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that solitude was what he wanted, what he deserved after his failure. But these past 2 days with Delilah had awakened something he thought long dead, a desire for human connection, for purpose beyond mere survival. Looking at her across the table, her copper hair catching the lamplight, her hands occasionally moving to cradle her swollen belly, Owen realized with startling clarity that he didn't want to return to his empty cabin alone. But what right did he have to ask anything of this woman who had already lost so much? Their meal was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. Both tensed, Owen's hand moving instinctively to his revolver. Mrs. Thornton appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. Deputies at the door, Yates. Says Sheriff Taylor needs you right away. They've spotted Barker and his men riding into town. Owen rose immediately. Stay here, he instructed Delilah. Don't open the door for anyone but me or Mrs. Thornton. Delilah stood as well, fear and resolve mingling in her expression. Be careful, Owen, please. On impulse, Owen crossed to her and took her hand. I'll be back, Delilah, that's a promise. Then, before he could reconsider, he leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. Keep that baby safe. With a final nod to Mrs. Thornton, Owen followed the waiting deputy into the night, his mind now focused entirely on the confrontation to come. Silas Barker had terrorized and killed with impunity for too long. Tonight, that would end one way or another. The streets of Wichita had emptied somewhat, word of potential trouble spreading quickly through the town's efficient gossip network. Sheriff Taylor was waiting outside his office with 3 deputies besides Owen. They're at the Drovers, Taylor informed him without preamble. All 4 of them asking questions about Thomas O'Connor again, getting aggressive about it. Anyone hurt? Owen asked. Not yet. Barman stalling them sent word to us. Taylor checked his revolver. We go in calm but ready. I want them alive if possible. They need to stand trial for what they've done in Missouri. Owen nodded his agreement, though privately he wondered if Barker was the type to surrender peacefully. Men like him rarely chose prison over a fight. They approached the Drovers' Rest from different directions, Taylor and 1 deputy from the front, Owen and the others from the rear and side entrances. Through the windows, Owen could see the 4 men at the bar. Silas Barker was unmistakable in his red vest, leaning menacingly toward the nervous barman. Sheriff Taylor entered first, pushing through the swinging doors with confident authority. Evening, gentlemen, he called, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet saloon. Understand you're looking for someone. Barker turned slowly, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. His eyes narrowed as he took in Taylor's badge. Just asking some friendly questions, Sheriff. No law against that. Depends on how you ask them, Taylor replied evenly. My town, my rules. And I hear you've been less than polite. As they spoke, Owen and the other deputies entered from the remaining doors, effectively surrounding Barker and his men. Owen positioned himself where he could keep all four in his sights. Barker's gaze shifted, taking in the additional lawmen. His eyes lingered on Owen, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. Don't believe I know you, deputy, Barker said, addressing Owen directly. Don't believe you do, Owen agreed. But I know you, Silas Barker, know about the bank in Missouri, the people you killed there. And Thomas O'Connor. At the mention of Thomas, Barker's expression darkened. That thieving bastard stole from me. Taking back what's mine isn't a crime. Murder is, Sheriff Taylor interjected. As is robbery, the money O'Connor took was evidence of your crimes. We have it now, along with his written testimony. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Barker's face. One of his men, younger than the others, clearly nervous, shifted his weight, hand edging toward his gun. Don't, Owen warned sharply, not worth dying over. You're under arrest, Barker, Taylor continued. You and your men, for the murder of Thomas O'Connor and for the robbery and killings in Missouri. Put your weapons on the bar, nice and easy. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Owen could feel the potential for violence hovering in the air like a thunderstorm about to break. Barker's eyes darted between the lawmen, calculating odds, looking for an opening. 4 of you, 4 of us, he said finally. Not great odds for either side. Difference is, we've got the law on our side, Taylor replied calmly, and every man in this saloon as witness. Owen watched Barker's face, recognizing the exact moment the outlaw decided to fight rather than surrender. It was a subtle shift, a hardening of the eyes, a slight tensing of the shoulders. Now, Owen shouted, just as Barker reached for his gun. What followed was chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, the confined space of the saloon amplifying each shot to deafening levels. Patrons dove for cover, overturning tables and chairs. Glass shattered as stray bullets hit bottles behind the bar. Owen took aim at Barker, but had to duck as one of the gang members fired at him. His return shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around with the impact. Through the smoke and confusion, Owen saw Barker backing toward the rear door, using one of his own wounded men as a shield. Without hesitation, Owen vaulted over an overturned table, closing the distance between them. It's over, Barker, he shouted above the din. Surrender. Instead of replying, Barker shoved his injured companion toward Owen and bolted through the door into the alley behind the saloon. Owen pushed past the wounded man in pursuit. Outside, the night air was cool and clear after the smoke-filled saloon. Owen paused, listening for footsteps. A sound to his left had him spinning, gun raised. Barker stood at the end of the alley, his own weapon trained on Owen. Blood stained his fancy vest, whether his own or someone else's. Owen couldn't tell. You're working with her, aren't you? Barker called. O'Connor's wife. Where is she? Somewhere you'll never find her, Owen replied, holding his position. Put the gun down, Barker. You've got nowhere to go. Barker laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Always somewhere to go as long as you're breathing. His eyes narrowed. Tell the widow I'll find her eventually. That money's mine. The money's evidence now, Owen said, taking a careful step forward, and you'll hang for what you've done. Something shifted in Barker's expression, a reckless determination that Owen had seen before in cornered men with nothing left to lose. Before Barker could act on it, Owen made his decision. Both men fired at almost the same instant. Owen felt the burn of a bullet grazing his left arm, but his own shot found its mark. Barker staggered backward, his gun clattering to the ground as his hands went to his chest where a dark stain was rapidly spreading. He looked almost surprised as he sank to his knees. Didn't think you had it in you, deputy, he gasped. Owen approached cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on the dying man. For men like you, I have plenty. Barker coughed, blood speckling his lips. She'll never be safe, he managed, his voice fading. My brother, he'll come looking when he hears. With those ominous words, Silas Barker slumped forward, dead before he hit the ground. Owen stared down at the body, Barker's final threat echoing in his mind. After a moment, he holstered his weapon and turned to find Sheriff Taylor standing at the entrance to the alley. "One dead here," Owen reported. "Barker," Taylor nodded grimly. "Two more inside, the youngest surrendered. He's singing like a bird already, confirming everything about the Missouri robbery and O'Connor's murder." "Barker said something about a brother," Owen said, wincing as the adrenaline faded and the pain from his wound made itself known. "That he'd come looking for revenge. We'll deal with that if it happens," Taylor replied, noticing Owen's injury. "You need to get that arm looked at." "Doc Miller's just down the street." Owen shook his head. "It's just a graze. I need to get back to Delilah, to Mrs. O'Connor, let her know it's over." Taylor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Go on then, we'll handle things here. Come by my office tomorrow to make your statement." With a grateful nod, Owen headed back toward Mrs. Thornton's boarding house, clutching his injured arm. The streets were beginning to fill again as word spread that the shooting was over. Several people called out questions as he passed, but he ignored them, focused only on reaching Delilah. When he arrived at the boarding house, Mrs. Thornton took one look at his bloodied sleeve and his expression and wordlessly pointed toward the parlor where he'd left Delilah hours earlier. Owen found her pacing anxiously, her face pale with worry. She froze when she saw him, her eyes immediately going to his injured arm. "You're hurt," she gasped, rushing toward him. "It's nothing," he assured her. "Just a graze." Her hands were gentle as she helped him remove his coat to examine the wound. "This needs cleaning and bandaging, Mrs. Thornton has a medical kit." "Delilah," Owen said, capturing her hands to still her nervous movements. "It's over. Barker's dead. His men are either dead or in custody." She stared at him, the news taking a moment to register. "Truly, they can't hurt us anymore." "Truly," he confirmed, though he chose not to share Barker's final threat about his brother. That was a problem for another day if it ever materialized. "The sheriff has the money and Thomas's letter. The surviving gang member is confessing to everything." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, not of sorrow, but of profound relief. "It's really over," she whispered. Without warning, she threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Owen hesitated only briefly before returning the embrace, his good arm holding her close. "Thank you," she murmured against his shirt, "for everything, for saving us." Owen felt something shift within him, a breaking down of the walls he'd built around his heart since that terrible day in Texas. Holding Delilah, feeling the press of her unborn child between them, he realized that what he'd thought was strength, his isolation, his emotional distance, had actually been fear. Fear of failing again, of caring again, of living again. "You saved yourself," he told her, his voice rough with emotion. "You got away from them, kept riding even when it was hard, protected your baby. I just helped at the end." Delilah pulled back slightly to look up at him, her eyes still shining with tears. "We saved each other, I think." Before Owen could respond to this profound observation, Mrs. Thornton appeared with medical supplies. "Sit down, Yates, before you bleed all over my clean floor," she ordered briskly. "Mrs. O'Connor, if you could help him with his shirt, I'll fetch some hot water." The moment broken, they separated. But as Delilah helped him remove his shirt and began to gently clean his wound, Owen couldn't forget the feeling of her in his arms or the truth of her words. They had saved each other. And now, with the immediate danger past, they faced a different kind of uncertainty. What came next for a solitary ex-lawman and a pregnant widow whose paths had crossed by chance or fate on a stormy Kansas night. 3 days passed in relative peace. Owen's wound, though painful, was healing well under Delilah's attentive care. Sheriff Taylor had taken his statement and officially released him from his temporary deputy position, though he'd added that there would always be a place for Owen on his force if he wanted it. The surviving member of Barker's gang had indeed provided enough evidence to connect them to the Missouri bank robbery, confirming everything in Thomas's letter. The stolen money would be returned to the bank, and justice would be served for all of Barker's victims. Throughout these days, Owen and Delilah had fallen into a comfortable routine at Mrs. Thornton's boarding house. They took their meals together, often walked through town in the afternoons, and spent evenings talking quietly in the parlor. To any observer, they might have appeared to be a married couple awaiting the birth of their first child. But neither had spoken of the future, of what would happen when Owen's arm was fully healed and there was no longer any reason for them to remain in Wichita. The question hung unasked between them, growing more pressing with each passing day. On the afternoon of the fourth day, they sat together on a bench in the small park near the center of town. The April weather was mild, the trees beginning to leaf out in delicate green. "Sheriff Taylor offered me a permanent position," Owen said suddenly, breaking their companionable silence. Delilah looked at him, surprise evident in her expression. "As a deputy, here in Wichita," Owen nodded, watching a group of children playing nearby. "Said he could use a man with my experience. Are you considering it?" "I might be," he admitted. "Depends on a few things." Delilah waited for him to elaborate, but when he didn't, she asked softly, "What things?" Owen turned to face her fully. "You, mostly, your plans." A flush crept into Delilah's cheeks. "I've been thinking about staying in Wichita. Mrs. Thornton mentioned that the school might need a teacher after the current one leaves to get married next month. I taught children back in Ohio before I married Thomas." "You'd be good at that," Owen said, genuinely believing it. He'd seen how patient she was, how clearly she explained things. "But what about when the baby comes? Teaching and caring for an infant would be challenging alone." "I wouldn't be completely alone," Delilah replied carefully. "Mrs. Thornton has offered to help, and perhaps there might be someone else willing to help as well." The question was tentative, hopeful. Owen knew this was the moment to be honest with Delilah and with himself. "Delilah," he began, taking her hand in his, "when you showed up at my cabin that night, I'd been alone for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to care about anyone. To have someone depend on me, too, to want to build a life that included another person." Her fingers tightened around his, encouraging him to continue. "These past days with you have reminded me what I was missing, what I was hiding from." He met her gaze directly. "I care for you, Delilah, more than I thought possible in such a short time, and I care about your child, too." "Owen," she whispered, her eyes bright with emotion. "I'm not proposing marriage," he clarified quickly. "It's too soon for both of us. You're still grieving Thomas, and I'm still learning how to be around people again." Delilah nodded, understanding in her expression. "So what are you suggesting?" "That we both stay in Wichita. I'll take the deputy position. You can teach when you're ready. We can see where this connection between us leads." Owen squeezed her hand gently. "No pressure, no expectations, just possibility." A smile bloomed across Delilah's face, transforming her features. "I'd like that very much, Owen." Relief and joy flooded through him. "Then it's settled. I'll speak to Sheriff Taylor tomorrow. And I'll inquire about the teaching position," Delilah added. "Though I'll need to find more permanent lodgings first. I can't impose on Mrs. Thornton forever." Owen hesitated, then decided to share the other piece of news he'd been considering. "I rode out to a property yesterday while you were resting. Small house at the edge of town. 2 bedrooms, stable for a couple of horses, good well water." Delilah's eyebrows rose. "You're thinking of buying it." "Already did," Owen admitted. "Signed the papers this morning. It's not much compared to my land outside town, but it's closer to everything, more practical for a deputy's life." "What about your cabin, your horses?" "I've arranged to sell most of the horses to a rancher I trust, keeping 2 for myself, my buckskin and your mare." He shrugged slightly. "The cabin can wait. Maybe someday it could be a place to get away from town now and then." Delilah considered all this. "It sounds like you've thought everything through." "Almost everything," Owen said, his voice dropping slightly. "There's room in the house for a boarder, someone who might need a place to stay while she gets established teaching, someone with a baby on the way who shouldn't be alone." He watched her face carefully, worried he was pushing too far too fast. But Delilah's expression softened, and she placed her free hand over their already joined ones. "Are you asking me to live with you, Owen Yates, as a boarder?" he clarified. "With your own room, your own space, no expectations." He cleared his throat. "At least until we both know what we want." Delilah studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I think that's a very sensible arrangement. Practical?" "Exactly," Owen agreed, relieved. "Practical?" A mischievous smile touched Delilah's lips. Though I must say, for a former Texas Ranger, you're not very daring when it comes to matters of the heart." Owen blinked, surprised by her teasing. Then he laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Give me time, Mrs. O'Connor. I'm relearning a lot of things these days." "We have time," she assured him, her expression growing more serious. "That's the gift you've given us, Owen. Time to heal, time to decide what comes next, time to see where this leads." As they sat together in the spring sunshine, Owen felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. Whatever came next, whether their relationship grew into something deeper or remained a friendship, he was no longer alone. And neither was Delilah. For now, that was enough. 2 months later, in the early hours of a warm June morning, Owen was awakened by a frantic knocking on his bedroom door. "Owen," Delilah's voice called from the hallway. "Owen, it's time." He was out of bed in an instant, pulling on trousers as he rushed to open the door. Delilah stood there in her nightgown, one hand braced against the wall, the other cradling her belly. "The baby's coming," she gasped, wincing as a contraction seized her. "My water broke." Owen's mind raced. They'd prepared for this, discussed it dozens of times. Doc Miller had assured them that despite the earlier scare, Delilah's pregnancy was progressing normally. The baby was still coming a bit early, but not dangerously so. "I'll get the doctor," Owen said, helping Delilah back to her room. "Just breathe like he showed you." "Hurry," she urged, her face contorted with pain. "This one feels different from the false labor before, stronger." Owen helped her onto the bed, then rushed to dress properly. Within minutes, he was riding toward town to fetch Doc Miller, the cool night air clearing the sleep from his mind. The past 2 months had been a period of adjustment and growing closeness. Owen had settled into his role as deputy, earning the respect of Sheriff Taylor and the townsfolk. Delilah had secured the teaching position for the fall term, though she wouldn't begin until after the baby was a few months old. Their living arrangement had raised some eyebrows initially, but Mrs. Thornton's vocal support and Owen's badge had silenced most critics. Besides, Wichita was still frontier enough that practical solutions to life's challenges were generally respected, even if they didn't conform to Eastern sensibilities. Most importantly, Owen and Delilah had grown closer, their friendship deepening into something neither was quite ready to name but both cherished. They still maintained separate rooms, separate lives in many ways, but the connection between them was undeniable. Doc Miller was thankfully at home and quickly gathered his medical bag. "First babies often take their time," he assured Owen as they hurried back, "but it's good you came promptly." When they arrived, they found Delilah pacing the bedroom, breathing heavily through contractions that were coming closer together. "Well, Mrs. O'Connor," Doc Miller said cheerfully after examining her, "looks like your little one is eager to meet the world. You're progressing faster than I expected." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Owen boiled water, gathered clean linens, and tried to make himself useful while the doctor attended to Delilah. When she cried out in pain, it took all his willpower not to rush to her side. "You can come in, Deputy," Doc Miller called eventually. "She's asking for you." Owen entered the bedroom hesitantly. Delilah lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face flushed with exertion. She reached for his hand as another contraction began. "I'm here," he said, letting her grip his fingers with surprising strength. "Don't leave," she gasped when the pain subsided. "I won't," he promised, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "Not unless you want me to." Doc Miller smiled approvingly. "Good man. Now, Mrs. O'Connor, on the next contraction, I need you to push as hard as you can." What followed was the most amazing and terrifying experience of Owen's life. Delilah's courage as she labored to bring her child into the world humbled him. He murmured encouragement, wiped her brow, and let her crush his hand when the pain became overwhelming. And then, as the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, a new cry filled the room, strong, indignant, alive. "You have a son, Mrs. O'Connor," Doc Miller announced, lifting a squirming, red-faced infant for them to see. Tears streamed down Delilah's cheeks as the doctor placed the swaddled newborn in her arms. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." Owen stared at the tiny being, overcome with emotions he couldn't begin to name. The baby had a dusting of reddish hair like his mother, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were the deep blue of all newborns. "He's perfect," Owen managed, his voice rough. Delilah looked up at him, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "Would you like to hold him?" Stunned by the offer, Owen hesitated. I've never." "Just support his head," Doc Miller instructed, already cleaning up his instruments. "You won't break him." With trembling hands, Owen accepted the tiny bundle. The baby weighed almost nothing, yet holding him felt like carrying the most precious cargo in the world. "Hello, little man," he said softly, marveling at the miniature features, the perfect tiny fingers. "Welcome to the world." The baby yawned, his small face scrunching up in an expression that made Owen's heart contract painfully in his chest. This was Thomas O'Connor's son, a child who would grow up without ever knowing his father. But looking at Delilah's tired, happy face, Owen made a silent promise to the man he'd never met this child would be loved and protected, would know his father's courage and sacrifice. "What will you name him?" Owen asked, carefully returning the baby to Delilah's arms. She cradled her son close, studying his face. "I've been thinking about that. I'd like to call him Thomas after his father." She looked up at Owen. "But for his middle name, I was thinking, Owen, if that's all right with you." Emotion closed Owen's throat, making speech impossible for a moment. "You want to name him after me," he finally managed. "You saved his life," Delilah said simply. "Before he was even born, it seems fitting." "Thomas Owen O'Connor," Doc Miller pronounced, packing up his bag. "Strong name for a strong boy. He's healthy as can be, Mrs. O'Connor, despite coming a bit early. After the doctor left, promising to return that evening to check on mother and child, Owen sat beside Delilah's bed, watching as she gazed adoringly at her newborn son. "You should rest," he told her gently. "You've done amazing work today." Delilah nodded, her eyelids already drooping with exhaustion. "Will you stay, just until we fall asleep?" "Of course," Owen promised, settling into the chair beside her bed. As Delilah and little Thomas drifted into peaceful slumber, Owen maintained his vigil, overcome by the profound realization that his life had changed irrevocably. 2 months ago, he'd been a solitary man, isolated by choice and haunted by past failures. Now he shared his home and, increasingly, his heart with a woman of remarkable courage and her newborn son. He wasn't Thomas's father, and he might never be. But watching over them both, Owen understood with perfect clarity that he wanted to be a part of their lives for as long as they would have him. Family. After years of believing he would never have one again, Owen Yates had somehow found himself at the heart of one. It terrified and elated him in equal measure. Outside, Wichita was coming to life, the sun rising on a new day. Inside this quiet room, something else was dawning, the possibility of a future brighter than Owen had dared to imagine since that terrible day in Texas 3 years ago. Carefully, so as not to disturb the sleeping pair, Owen reached out to touch little Thomas's tiny hand. The baby reflexively gripped his finger, holding on with surprising strength. "I've got you both," Owen whispered, a promise to the sleeping mother and child. "For as long as you want me, I've got you." As summer turned to autumn, life in the modest house at the edge of Wichita settled into a pleasant routine. Thomas Owen O'Connor grew healthy and strong, his personality emerging a little more each day. Delilah had begun her teaching position at the town school, quickly becoming beloved by her pupils for her patience and creativity. Owen continued as Taylor's deputy, his knowledge of the territory and quiet authority making him an effective lawman. To the outside world, they might have appeared an unusual family, the widow, her baby, and the solitary deputy who shared their home. But the arrangement worked for them, each finding in their unconventional household the support and companionship they needed. On a crisp October evening, Owen returned home to find Delilah in the kitchen, Thomas securely balanced on her hip as she stirred something delicious smelling on the stove. "You're late," she observed, though her tone held no reproach. "Difficult day." Owen hung his hat on the peg by the door, removing his gun belt with the practiced care of a man aware of the curious toddler watching his every move. Cattlemen dispute, nothing serious, just time-consuming. Dinner's almost ready, Delilah told him. Would you take Thomas while I finish? Owen held out his arms, and the 4-month-old went to him willingly, gurgling happily. Thomas had grown attached to Owen, often calming instantly when the deputy held him. "Hello, partner," Owen greeted the baby, who responded with a toothless grin that never failed to warm his heart. "Keeping your mother busy today? He's been an angel," Delilah reported, turning her attention back to the stove. "Mrs. Thornton came by to help while I prepared lessons for tomorrow. She's convinced he'll be walking before he's a year old." Owen bounced the baby gently, making him laugh. "Strong legs, just like your mother," he agreed. "Might make a horseman of you yet." As they sat down to dinner, Thomas secured in the cradle Owen had crafted himself. Delilah shared news from her day at school, while Owen told her of Sheriff Taylor's latest efforts to maintain order in the growing town. It was domestic, comfortable, and sometimes Owen marveled at how natural it all felt. The fear he'd once had that he was somehow cursed to bring danger to those he cared about had faded in the face of the everyday happiness he found in this home. After dinner, as they sat together on the small porch watching the sunset, Owen decided it was time to address something that had been on his mind for weeks. "I've been thinking," he began, glancing at Delilah beside him, Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently, her blue eyes bright in the fading light. Owen smiled at her joke. "Maybe so." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about us, this arrangement we have." Delilah's expression grew more serious. "Has something changed? Are you unhappy with it?" "Not unhappy," Owen clarified quickly. "Just thinking it might be time for something more official." "Official?" Delilah repeated, watching him carefully. Owen shifted in his chair, uncharacteristically nervous. "Delilah, these past months with you and Thomas have been the happiest of my life. I never thought I'd have this again, a home, a family, someone to care for who cares for me." "We care for you very much, Owen," Delilah said softly. "Both of us." "And I love you," Owen replied, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "Both of you. I know Thomas isn't my son, and I'd never try to replace his father in his life or his memory, but I want to be a father to him in every way that matters." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. "Owen. I'm asking you to marry me, Delilah," he said simply, reaching into his pocket for the small ring he'd purchased the previous week. "Not because it's practical or because people talk, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you and Thomas, if you'll have me." Delilah looked at the simple gold band with its modest diamond, then back at Owen's face. "Are you certain marriage is a big step from being landlord and boarder?" "I think we passed landlord and boarder somewhere around the time Thomas was born, and you asked me to hold your hand through 12 hours of labor," Owen said dryly. That drew a watery laugh from Delilah. "Fair point." She shifted Thomas to one arm so she could touch Owen's face gently. "I love you too, you know, have for months now," hope surged through Owen's chest. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Delilah confirmed, her smile radiant. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Yates." Owen slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby between them. It wasn't their first kiss. That milestone had been crossed on a summer evening when Thomas was just a few weeks old, but it held special significance now, a promise for their future. When they separated, both a little breathless, Delilah rested her forehead against his. "Thomas would approve, I think. He'd want us to be happy." "I like to think so," Owen agreed. "He loved you enough to try to protect you, even at the cost of his own life. That's something I understand." "No more talk of costs," Delilah said firmly. "Only gains, the three of us together." As if on cue, Thomas stirred and opened his eyes, regarding them both with a solemn expression before breaking into another gummy smile. "I think he approves," Owen chuckled, touching the baby's soft cheek. "Of course he does," Delilah replied confidently. "He's a very intelligent child, after all." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Wichita. Mrs. Thornton held Thomas throughout the service, beaming with satisfaction at the union she'd quietly encouraged from the beginning. Sheriff Taylor stood as Owen's best man, and several of Delilah's fellow teachers attended, along with many of the townsfolk who had come to respect the deputy and the schoolteacher. If anyone thought the marriage hasty or unusual given their circumstances, such opinions were kept private. Wichita in 1875 was still being shaped by the people who lived there, its social conventions more flexible than in established Eastern communities. For Owen and Delilah, the ceremony simply formalized what had already become truth in their hearts: they were a family, bound by love rather than obligation or convenience. Their wedding night was spent in the house that had been their home for months, though with a significant change. Owen moved his belongings into Delilah's larger bedroom, Thomas's cradle positioned near the window where the morning light would greet him. As Owen held his wife in his arms that night, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a stormy night and a desperate woman on his doorstep to this, a home filled with love, a son to raise, a future to build together. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, her head resting on his chest, her copper hair spread across the pillow. "How lucky I am," Owen replied honestly. "How different things might have been if you hadn't found my cabin that night." "I've wondered about that too," Delilah admitted. "What if I'd ridden another direction? What if you hadn't been home? But you did, and I was," Owen said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And now we have this. All of it." Delilah propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her expression serious in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Do you ever think about what Barker said, about his brother seeking revenge?" Owen had told her of Barker's final threat shortly after Thomas was born, not wanting to keep secrets between them. "Sometimes," he acknowledged, "but it's been 6 months with no sign of trouble. Barker might have been lying, trying to scare us even at the end. And if he wasn't, then we'll face it together," Owen promised. "I won't let anyone harm you or Thomas. Ever." Delilah searched his face, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw there. "Together," she agreed, settling back against him. "Always." As they drifted toward sleep, Owen allowed himself to truly believe in the future they were building, not just for tomorrow or next month, but for years to come. Perhaps they would have more children. Perhaps they would eventually move to a larger house, or even back to his cabin outside town as Wichita grew more populous. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything since that stormy April night together, with courage and love. In the other room, Thomas made a soft sound in his sleep, a reminder of the miracle that had brought them together. Owen smiled in the darkness, holding Delilah closer. From danger and loss had come the greatest gift of all: a second chance at happiness, at family, at love. For a man who had once believed himself destined for solitude, it was more than he had ever dared to hope for, and it was enough. More than enough, it was everything. Epilogue: 5 years later, the Kansas prairie stretched golden under the late summer sun, the farmhouse standing proud against the vast blue sky. A small figure ran across the yard, his red gold hair catching the light as he chased after a puppy nearly as energetic as he was. Thomas. Not too far from the house, Delilah called from the porch where she sat shelling peas, her rounded belly evidence of the child that would join their family in another month. "Yes, Mama," the 5-year-old called back, though he didn't slow his pursuit of the puppy. Delilah shook her head, smiling. Thomas Owen Yates, legally adopted by Owen 2 years after their marriage, had his mother's coloring, but his adoptive father's determination and love of the outdoors. He was a healthy, happy child who knew he was loved, not only by the parents who raised him, but also by the father who had given his life to protect him before he was born. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention to the long drive leading to the farm. Owen appeared, riding his faithful buckskin, returning from his daily patrol of their property. After 3 years as Taylor's deputy, Owen had resigned his position to focus on rebuilding his horse breeding business, this time with his family by his side. They had moved back to Owen's original cabin outside Wichita 2 years ago. expanding it into a comfortable home that offered the space and freedom they all cherished. Delilah still taught occasionally, taking on students who needed extra help or couldn't attend the regular school, but her primary focus now was their growing family. "Papa," Thomas shouted, abandoning his chase to run toward Owen, "did you see any wolves today, or bears, or Indians?" Owen dismounted, scooping up his son with practiced ease. "No wolves or bears," he reported seriously, "but I did see a fox with her kits and a hawk hunting in the south field." Thomas's eyes widened with excitement. "Can we go see them tomorrow? Can I ride Daisy?" "If your mother says it's all right," Owen replied, carrying Thomas toward the porch. "And if you finish all your chores, I will, I promise." Thomas squirmed to be set down, then raced off to resume his game with the puppy, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another adventure with his father. Owen climbed the steps to the porch, leaning down to kiss Delilah tenderly. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than yesterday," she assured him, making room for him on the bench beside her. "The baby's been active, though. I think we might have another Thomas on our hands in terms of energy." Owen placed a gentle hand on her belly, smiling when he felt a decisive kick against his palm. "Strong like his mama." "Or her mama," Delilah corrected with a smile. They had decided not to predict the baby's gender this time, preferring to be surprised. "Or her mama," Owen agreed, his arm slipping around Delilah's shoulders. They sat together in companionable silence, watching Thomas play in the yard that stretched toward the prairie beyond. The past 5 years had brought changes and challenges, including a tense encounter with a man claiming to be Barker's brother that had fortunately ended without violence, but through it all, their bond had only strengthened. "You ever think about that night?" Delilah asked suddenly. "When I arrived at your door," Owen glanced at her, understanding the reference immediately. "Sometimes, usually when it storms." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Why do you ask?" "I was just thinking how differently things might have turned out. If you hadn't taken me in, if you hadn't been the man you are." She leaned against him. "We might never have had all this." "But we do have it," Owen reminded her, his voice quiet but firm. "Every day, every moment." Delilah nodded, her hand finding his and intertwining their fingers. "Yes, we do." As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Owen Yates looked at the life he and Delilah had built, their son playing carefree in the yard, their second child growing within her, the home they had made together out of hope and courage and love. From darkness had come light, from danger, safety, from loneliness, family. And in this moment, watching the sunset with his wife beside him and their son's laughter carrying on the prairie wind, Owen knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be, home.